I'm here on the southeast hill in Medicine Hat at Robertson Park. It's a memorial to a man who served in the First World War, gave his life in the First World War. His name was J.P. Robertson. He was a private. J.P. stands for James Peter. He was known as Singing Pete when he worked for the CPR. He was an engineer, and he used to always be singing when he was working on the train between Medicine Hat and Calgary. This park is located in southeast Medicine Hat, Cambridge Street to the south, Belfast Street to the north, and 4th Avenue southeast to the east. It is in memory of Private Robertson, who was awarded the Victoria Cross for his bravery in battle on the battlefield in France where he gave his life. We're going to tell his story. And I'm joined now by Wes Krause, who is the curator of the South Alberta Light Horse Regimental Museum. Among the other hats that you wear, the archives officer for the Royal Canadian Legion, Robertson Memorial Branch, number 17 here in Medicine Hat. Welcome, Wes.
Well, thank you for the invitation. And as I said, our thoughts are probably parallel because I was thinking of getting a hold of you anyhow on other matters that we'll discuss later.
You bet. The Robertson Memorial Branch ties in nicely with what we're talking about today. Private Pete Robertson, who was known as Singing Pete, the CPR engineer who enlisted and went to fight in the First World War. In the Battle of Passchendaele, he lost his life.
Yes.
What was important about the Battle of Passchendaele? Because I understand there were 3 engagements there.
Yes, this was the second Battle of Passchendaele. And basically what it was a salient that was in the German lines, and basically the front lines. And it threatened the Canadian Corps who was positioned in that area. So they needed to break that salient open so that they could move forward past that whole area. That was all tied into the overall Battle of Ypres, or Ypres, they call it. And that was a major battle in World War I. But it was also a very terrible battle because it inflicted thousands and thousands of casualties. Now, also, too, it is truth that the conditions at the time were not very good. And one of the things that was present, and it's unfortunate, it's just weather. It rained a lot in that area. And what the men were taught and trained to do, if they're advancing across no man's land, and they're advancing, and some of their chums just happened to slide or slip into a shell hole, a crater that was filled full of water. They were trained to keep on going, not to stop the advance. And that's something that's really interesting when we look at the second Battle of Passchendaele and James Robertson's part in that. He had a pretty major part, albeit in a small section. What was happening, there was a German machine gun emplacement that was threatening the battalion. Now, he was with the 27th Battalion, which was a Winnipeg battalion. There's a long history as how he got to that. But he was volunteered to do this. Now, as you said, he was Singing Pete was his nickname. Yeah, he had a great voice, but he was also a big guy.
About 6'3", if I recall.
That's
correctly.
correct. Well over 180 pounds. And the commanding officer of his company said, we need somebody to silence that German machine gun. Well, he put up his hand, of course, and a couple other guys, and they went through that quagmire of the battlefield, and they took the position. And he captured the German gun. And he turned the German gun on the Germans. So that was really something else as well, too. Now, when you think about, it's just a German gun, like picking up your coffee mug here. Oh, no. No, the German Maxim machine gun was a very heavy arm. It weighed probably about 35 to 40 pounds. And then you've got ammunition. And it's also water-cooled, so it's got a thick jacket on it. You've got a water container for that. So it's not something that you just pick up and run with it. But he did. And his guys that he was working with there that helped him, they put in a position and they engaged the Germans and fought back that advance. So he didn't win the Victoria Cross for that.
No, he did not.
That's right. Because once he'd consolidated that position, The rest of the battalion started to attempt to move forward. And there were a pair of snipers that, with the battalion that came under fire, and they were badly wounded. He saw this, and he didn't like that idea. He was going to help these guys. He knew his position was consolidated, so he felt he was the available guy, but also the available guy that would be able to pick these guys up and get them back. So he crossed again through that battlefield under fire and rescued one of the fellas, brought him back to the lines. He went back to pick up the other guy, and that's when he was killed.
Now, I understand it was probably an artillery shell that got him.
That's exactly right, because one of the guys, or I think there was one or two of the guys in his group that took the machine gun position, they had been killed by artillery in that position. And so, and again, now, we think artillery, okay, big deal, or just a couple of shells going here and there. But both sides, German and Canadians, they employed a massive amount of artillery. And one of the things the Canadian Corps were trained was to advance under artillery cover. So it was walking fire. So the artillery would lay down a barrage basically in a line. The Canadian Corps was behind that. And then at a specific time, that artillery fire would advance forward about 25, 50 yards, and then the men would advance that. So the men would be advancing, following their artillery fire, provided a lot of cover, so to speak, but also suppressed action, enemy action. Now, it's a great plan as long as nobody advances too quickly. And there were circumstances that occurred that, okay, a company started advancing before the barrage lifted. Don't do that. So they had to move back.
Now, you talk about no man's land. What was that like?
Put it this way, hell on earth without the heat.
Yeah.
Just imagine, say, to put it into perspective, a plot of land that is probably about the size of 4 or 5 football fields. And every square meter is a hole. And mud and water and blood and wire. The thing is, what's really crazy, both the Canadians and the Germans, they employed a lot of barbed wire entanglements. So they would set these barbed wire entanglements in such a location that it would funnel troops into a position where a machine gun was placed. So naturally, soldiers are thinking, okay, we're going to follow the path of least resistance. We're not going to go through that heavy wire. We're going to follow that trail, and there's a machine gun emplacement there. Yeah. So artillery was intended to try and disrupt enemy movement, enemy actions, as well as destroy those artillery or the barbed wire emplacements. Yeah. In most cases, it worked, but it also created the shell holes and stuff like that. And the nature of France at the time, the ground and everything, and with all that rain, as soon as he started doing that, it just churned it up, and it just turned into mud completely.
Soup.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And that's what I mentioned earlier was that if the men were advancing across no man's land and one of their chums happened to slip into that shell hole, keep advancing. You're taught not to move, not to go back for.
And when we think about Private Robertson going, I guess the term is he outflanked the German line?
He did.
Can you explain what he did there, how he did it?
Okay, basically the Germans were set up on a static line. And they had a rack of troops there that were preparing to advance over no man's land. Now, the flanks are on either side of that line. But in order to secure that flank, what they did, they put in entrenched machine gun positions to prevent the Canadians from going around that. So that's what Private Robertson was assigned to do, was to go around that flank to take out that German machine gun position, which he did. And as a result, when he turned the fire back on the Germans, well, that just kind of demoralized them in a pretty big way, and they started moving back. But then they realized, well, this is just one guy. Well, come on, let's go get him. Well, that's when the rest of the battalion started stepping up. and they were able to keep the pressure on.
You describe how the line would move behind the artillery fire, but I'm thinking the other side's got to be firing artillery too.
There's a lot of counter battery engagements, so that's where the problems occur, and that's where the grinding mill of World War I. That's where why so many men died, because opposing artillery was huge. Now you just imagine that they're advancing artillery. Well, the Germans are doing the same thing. Somewhere along the line, those two lines of artillery are going to meet. Mm-hmm. And behind those two lines are soldiers. And that's where things really get crazy. Mm-hmm. Now, to protect the trenches, most of the times the artillery fire would be just in front of the trench, and it just lay a massive barrage in front of the trench to prevent anybody from getting past that. And again, that was just a grinding mill. Men got through, but it was horrendous.
Was there air cover at this time? We're talking November 1917, so aviation is still in its infancy.
It is. And a lot of the aircraft that were used in observation. So they'd be flying up there just to watch where enemy troops are, where the Canadian troops are. And the early infancy, and again, as you say, of radio communication was instituted in World War I, where they could communicate with the forces on the ground. But most of the cases, you'd fly up, an airman would fly up, look where everybody is, he'd have to fly back and report that in. Now also, too, armed conflict in the air began at that point. And we all think, oh, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, it was the Red Baron with his Fokker triplane, and there's the Sopwith Camels and the Newports and all. Yeah, well, not quite accurate. The first real engagements were between observers. So it was like a single engine, what they call a pusher aircraft. So the engine is at the back of the plane, pushing the plane ahead. You had a pilot and an observer. And the observer's looking with his binoculars, watching everything. And a German observer would see that. It's like, oh, yeah, we don't want that. And there's literally, it started with pistol battles.
In the air.
In the air. And it's you think about that, you just kind of shake your head, like, how could they do that? Well, they did that. That's what they had to do. And an interesting, I'm going to, I hate to say it this way, but I say it all the time when I'm talking about military artifacts. I'm going to geek out for a minute here. There is an artifact that I actually had the opportunity to, examine, and it's an American military handgun that had a cage formed around the side of the handgun. See, this was a semi-automatic, so it would eject the cartridges out. And this cage wrapped around this handgun so that the spent cartridges coming out wouldn't snap or fall into a piece of the equipment on the airplane, like damage the fuselage or get sucked into the engines or put out an eye of the pilot. So it was all kept in this little cage. But those things are about as, well, they're very hard to find. They're about as scarce as, well, they're made of a material called unobtainium.
Unobtainium? I've never heard of that.
Yeah, they're virtually impossible to find. And luckily, I had the huge honor, my mentor in collecting in Missoula, Montana, he had one of these pieces. And it was just how they thought of that. It's just unbelievable. But it apparently worked. But that was the genesis of air combat. As engine, and we think, a fighter plane, you're flying at 300 miles an hour. No, you're lucky if you get 80 miles an hour.
Yeah, you're slow motion.
They're very slow.
Yeah.
But with that also, too, some of the later aircraft, they were quite maneuverable. And as time progressed, the efficiency of the aircraft also improved. So they had engines that were up to 150 horsepower. So you could get maybe 200 miles per hour. One of the problems was that firing a machine gun through the propeller arc.
Yes.
That was a challenge. But they met the challenge and they prevailed.
Okay.
Yep.
Private Robertson dies November the 16th, 1917, After the war, he is awarded the Victoria Cross, which is I think it is the highest medal that is available in the British Empire at the time.
That is true. The Victoria Cross is the highest valor medal in the British Commonwealth. And that was instituted in 1856.
By Queen Victoria.
By Queen Victoria, yes. And all of the Victoria Crosses of the era were made by one jeweler in London. I'm trying to remember, it was Holberry or something like that. And there was the rumor that they were made out of cannons, the bronze cannons used in either the Battle of Crimea or something of that nature. That was rumor. I don't think it's really been proven totally. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, it is a very, very high valor award. Canadians in World War I, there were not a lot of Canadians that were awarded that, and I've got the numbers here.
It is a rare number.
Yes, 73 Canadians
out
in
of
World War I.
How many hundreds of thousands served?
Exactly. Now, the thing is, the medal was awarded posthumously to his mother, who was living here in Medicine Hat. So that's where the connection to Medicine Hat really ties in, because Private Robertson was living in Medicine Hat when he died in the service. And then his Victoria Cross was given to his mother here in Medicine Hat as well, too, which I believe she remained here till her death.
I believe that service was at Riverside Veterans Memorial Park before the cenotaph was put up in May of 1919.
Yes, I would concur with that. Yeah, that says a lot now, too, when you mention that Riverside Veterans Memorial Park has an amazing history, The cenotaph, there are some very interesting names on there, and there's all the local soldiers from Medicine Hat, from World War I, World War II, a few from Korea. They don't have any from Vietnam, though there is a local fella that served in Vietnam and died there, serving with the American forces. But we've also got now Afghanistan with Stephen Stock.
We were down there to visit the cenotaph, and we saw the names, and I was thinking, okay, 1922, when this goes up, 226 names.
I think you're right on that. Yeah.
They probably thought that's it.
Yeah.
Sadly, there's the Second World War, as you mentioned, the Korean War, Afghanistan, Vietnam, and onwards it goes. And hopefully, they'll never have to add another one.
Well, that's the thing, and I have to agree with you on that. It's a terrible thing that happens, but because of their service and the valor that many of them exhibited, we can do what we're doing right now. If it wasn't for their sacrifice, we wouldn't be able to do this. So when we think back, Canadians died in war. Well, in World War I, there's nearly 66,000 soldiers died. In World War II, there's roughly about 45,000 soldiers died. In Korea, there's roughly about 500, and I believe it was 16 that died. And in Vietnam, there's 134 Canadians that died in Vietnam. And then in Afghanistan, it was around 158.
Yeah. And Canadians served in Korea, too.
Oh, yeah, Korean soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's why it is important at this time of the year to always remember.
Exactly. And that truly is the purpose of Remembrance Day, is to remember the fallen, but also to honor veterans.
Lest we forget.